The following program is presented by the HTM Podcast Network.
Welcome to another episode of Turnbuckle Talk, powered by thegorillaposition.com and a proud part of the Roar Network. Presented by the Hitting the Marks Podcast Network. Now in association with IndiePW.com. We are sponsored by collarandelbowbrand.com, where you can get 10% off when using promo code JKPodcast at the checkout. And in partnership with HypeCityVapors.com, where you can get 15% off all your e-juice for your vape by using promo code JKPodcast. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter by searching at TB Talk Pod. Listen to us on Podbean, iTunes, Google Podcast, CastBox, Spotify, and all those other podcatchers out there. As always, I am Karl Karufel.
And I am Big Joe.
And welcome back to Turnbuckle Talk, everyone.
Yeah, another week has come and gone in the world of professional wrestling. And before we get started here, Karl, as usual, we kind of like to see what's kind of going, because, we both live fairly busy lives. We're both still working full-time jobs through all this craziness. So other than work, how are things been going this past week for Mr. Karufel up in the icy north of Northern Ontario, Canada?
Honestly, I am tired. I just working lots, bouncing from some night shifts to day shifts and stuff like that. It's really, it takes a toll on your system, and my lack of sleep really makes an impact on that. So I have been tired lately, and it sucks because I don't want to be. I want to be able to be up and doing things with the kids and while we can in the house and stuff like that. So it makes it difficult, but we press on, and that's about the best that I can do. How's Big Joe been?
Well, I've kind of been, in a similar boat. I don't have quite as much on my plate to do with family and kids and whatnot, since I'm a single man. I have no other man attached to me. But I know, as I've said, I work a regular job. I think I got Karl with that line. You popped a little bit late for that one. But I've been working pretty steady through all this, and it's nice to have a regular paying job, still paying every week. But at the same time, a little bit of a breather would be nice, since so many people are getting all this kind of time off. I wouldn't even mind just a week to just kind of chill for a little bit.
Speaking of taking a week's time off, ladies and gentlemen, you will hear it here first. If you are not part of our social media pages, which you would have seen it there already, but Karl Karufel and the wife are going to be going back. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are going back to the Chris Jericho Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea, the triple whammy, February 1st to the 5th, 2021. Your boy will be on that ship again, and I cannot wait.
Yeah, for sure, man. That sounds like it's going to be a good time. All right, well, let's get to some of our wrestling discussion here, and this is going to, I think, pretty much kind of be the theme of the episode, and kind of going off of this topic. We had what I thought was a very good episode of Dark Side of the Ring this past week, dealing with the Dr. D and the slap heard round the world here, Karl. Before we get into some more details about this, what was your take on this episode? Because so far, I got to say, this was one of my favorites.
While it was a good episode, I wouldn't say that it was necessarily my favorite. It felt a little slower than the other ones. Yep. Almost a little bit too repetitive in things. Like they really didn't have enough content. But very well done anyways. I've always been very high on any of the Dark Side of the Ring episodes that have happened. Just this one, I don't think hit it out of the ballpark, so to speak. But still, it was very well done.
For me, it was a lot of the details to the story and what kind of happened that I had not necessarily forgotten about, but had kind of just, partially kind of forgotten about. So to see all that kind of stuff resurface, the ABC special that was done with this. But to start it off here, though, just the slap in general. I think that there's some misinterpretations of this as well. Now, when you look at the footage, I don't know if you see the same thing that I do, because the reporter who was doing the interview, John Stossel, of course, most wrestling fans from back in the time will remember who he is. He was a reporter that did that expose on the wrestling business. He claims that he was slapped in the ears during this incident. But when I watch the footage, I see an open-faced slap, or an open-handed slap, not an open-face slap. Doesn't make any sense. An open-handed slap on both cheeks, because he hit him, I believe it was on the right side first, dropped him, he got back up, and then he dropped him again. I didn't see contact on the side of the head or like the ears at all.
I didn't see on the ears either. What I did see was a classic slap to the face.
Yep.
Open-handed, not even necessarily across the cheek, but more across the jawline and the side of the neck. So that's where people might get, a misconception of, oh, he slapped him in the ear. Well, no, he really didn't. What he did is classic. He just kind of slapped him on the side of the face. Maybe his pinky or something caught his ear, or maybe or his index finger maybe caught his ear or something, but no, I really didn't see that at all. It was a picture perfect slap to the face.
Right. And one thing to take into account here too is we need to look at David Schultz himself, and specifically, Karl, the way that he was trained and who he was trained by, because I think that it's very important here, and I think a lot of people aren't really aware of this. He was trained by a man called Herb Welch. Now, this is a man who was trained by some of the original people in professional wrestling. So this was traditional old school wrestling. And as far as David was concerned when he was training, this was legitimate wrestling, Karl. This was not him training to basically be acting in the ring, however you kind of want to word this, fake wrestling, blah, blah, blah. He was really under the impression that this was legitimate.
This goes back to the old school days of catch as catch can wrestling, and that's exactly what it was. That's how he was taught. He was taught that you're in there to make the audience believe that you are legitimately damaging your opponent. Back in those days, that's what you did. I mean, you didn't open up the business to the crowd. You just didn't do that. I mean, for years, I mean, we saw like television shows and movies and stuff like that, like how long was it before, we'd always hear, filmed in front of a live studio audience, but we never saw the audience. No. So we never really knew, right? We weren't exposed to that. Yep. Watching television. The same thing with professional wrestling. I mean, you weren't exposed to anything that was in the back. And that's the way that it was. And those days, clearly have gone. They're dissipated. We all know what happens now, especially in the age of the internet. We all know what happens. It's put out there for us by everybody.
Right.
But back then, no. Your life and your pay was based on you.
Yeah, absolutely. And this again brings up the term Kayfabe, which I'm sure that some new wrestling fans kind of think that they know kind of what the term is, or maybe that it's kind of misconstrued there. Really, Kayfabe just really kind of stands for what you just talked about, Karl. When you're a professional wrestler, you are that professional wrestler. Even when you're in the ring, in your day-to-day life, you maintain that persona, and everybody else outside of the brotherhood essentially shouldn't and doesn't have access to that information. They're not privy to any of that. This ABC expose that was done definitely didn't help things in this respect. I think it's probably it's not the first time that things have been kind of exposed. I mean, it's gone back further. And this is one thing that I want to talk about Jim Cornette for a minute, because he definitely had a presence in this episode. And Jim gets a lot of heat for a lot of his opinions and his stance, and when he breaks down wrestling shows and is particularly harsh on WWE. He, on the other side of things, is very, very, very knowledgeable when it comes to the history of professional wrestling. That's something he doesn't get a lot of credit for. If you were to go to the Castle of Cornette, which is basically the upstairs part of his home, he has probably one of the most extensive and comprehensive collections of wrestling memorabilia, and a lot of the bits of history and whatnot. He keeps track of everything. He gets a lot of heat for his opinions, and I get it. But I mean, at the same time, he is very, very knowledgeable, and you need to kind of pay attention to what he talks and just kind of put aside, the stigma of, Garnett's talking, he's a dick, and I don't want to listen to him. No, when this kind of stuff, listen to what he says, because he's very knowledgeable and knows what he's talking about. And the original stance on kayfabe, he's 100% correct about.
He definitely is. Jim Cornette is a living, walking, talking, breathing, wrestling encyclopedia.
Yeah, man.
He definitely is. Even in this episode, you were taken into, and past episodes as well, but this one you really kind of saw a lot of the stuff that's inside the attic or the upstairs portion of his house. And there's newspaper articles, there are old posters, from different shows that have happened. Like he has so much stuff there, and he's been in the business this guy lives and breathes the business of professional wrestling. Yep. I liken him to somebody like Chris Angel or Harry Houdini, right?
Absolutely.
We're kind of looking at the same type of a brotherhood going on there. Do you think Harry Houdini really released anything from the world of illusions and magic? Absolutely. David Copperfield, same thing, right? Like these people that are in the world of illusion and magic, that's what they do. Mm-hmm. It's a brotherhood. Yep. It's a secret society, essentially. And that's what professional wrestling was. Absolutely. It was like a secret society that only a few were allowed into. And Jim Cornette has a real handle on that, and still lives by that today.
Absolutely.
And I think it's fantastic, because we're losing all of those people that have that type of a respect for the business.
Absolutely. And, getting back on David Schultz here, he had really worked himself up to the point to where he was one of Hulk Hogan's rivals, and that they were actually, we're breaking down the fourth wall in the kayfabe, of course, a little bit with this, outside of the ring. They were actually good friends with each other. They actually lived with each other at one point. Terry, Hulk Hogan, whatever you want to call him, was actually living with David for a short period of time. And then it got to the point of where we dealt with this situation here. And we had the slap, and we had the fallout of it. And then, this then was leading up to the first WrestleMania. And Hogan was going to be involved with Mr. T at WrestleMania 1, and David was basically left in the dark, basically just left off the show. And this is where some conflicting opinions and tales kind of come up here. There were supposedly, I believe it was a house show or some type of live event where Mr. T and Hogan were present, and of course David was there, I believe, at ringside. And we have Hogan saying that David attacked Mr. T, and then we have David saying absolutely that didn't happen. This isn't really anything new, even just outside professional wrestling. When in these kind of cases, it's always that kind of a he said, she said type of a thing. I know there's no she in this case, but people remember things differently. Now, when it comes to this, it's kind of hard to know who to believe. I'm inclined to believe David, just because I know Hogan's track record isn't all that great when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm just saying.
And unfortunately for me, it's hard to believe Dr. D in this, because he lives by that kayfabe.
Yeah,
So
still
no
to this day.
matter what, he's going to spin it into a way where he is made out to be the heel in all of this, because he was an amazing heel, and that's how he built his career, on the kayfabe of him being a bad guy. So yeah, it's very hard. It's difficult to really know who was telling the truth in this, because I mean, Hogan spins the truth to whatever he needs, and Dr. D is going to spin the truth to whatever he needs. So yeah, will we ever find out? Probably not.
Yep.
But at least we got two stories
Yeah, for
that
sure.
we can go by.
And a couple of other things to go along with this to note that I had kind of forgotten about was Hogan and T showed up on I'm assuming that it was probably tied to ABC somehow, or, it was obviously one of the major television networks. It was an appearance leading up to WrestleMania 1 where Hogan essentially put it's kind of like a reverse sleeper hold, I guess you would call it in the wrestling business. If you were to make like an MMA reference, it's basically like a guillotine choke. It's not choking across your trachea, it's referred to as a blood choke, where you're cutting off the blood and the arteries going to the brain. And he legitimately choked him out, and the guy passed out and whacked his head off the floor. And Hogan didn't receive any heat for this. And this is one of David's real sticking points. It's like, well, I slapped this guy in the face, twice, and then Hogan actually, made a guy, actually rendered a guy unconscious and possibly actually injured him, and he got not even a slap on the wrist. So we have a bit of this double standard happening, which again, this isn't just limited to professional wrestling. Double standards exist all over in society and sports and whatnot. And, Hogan being the golden child, he was kind of untouchable, kind of regardless of what he did there.
And that's exactly what it was. It was because Hogan was that golden boy. He was the one that really everything was being based around. He was that new guy that Vince McMahon Jr. was building the company off of, was Hulk Hogan. So no matter what, Hulk Hogan could have done anything and it wouldn't have mattered. But I mean, even with that, again, Hulk Hogan now was keeping with the kayfabe. And even during that, he says, like, hey, every appearance that we do, if they start to question what we do, we'll put them into a hold, and we'll show them how much it actually does hurt and how real this actually is, just like Dr. D did. So yeah, I mean, definitely there was a double standard that had happened there. Unfortunate, but it happened.
And of course, Hogan ultimately wasn't completely untouchable, because we know that there was, the infamous incident where he ended up being removed from the Hall of Fame and then was kind of reinstated back in there. So, like I said, ultimately he wasn't completely untouchable. It just took a lot longer for him. The other big thing on here was with John Stossel himself, dealing with the lawyers and I guess there was one that really kind of questioned just how hurt or injured he was, and basically said that he was holding on to this so-called injury just kind of mentally. There's some term used for that I can't think of off the top of my head. And in the interview during the episode, he did actually say, I did start to feel better once I was paid. Right?
Yeah,
so,
that was
so.
If you haven't watched the episode yet, go and watch it, because that's honestly, that's how he ended.
Yep.
The entire thing. That's how the episode pretty much ended. Was him in the end saying that this doctor, that was a doctor provided by WWE or the WWF at that time, because that's how things were done. The lawyers had to kind of have the other side's doctor take a look at the person. And just as Big Joe said, that doctor came in and says, even before examining him or looking at him or anything, just says, it's been a while now. I think you're just holding on to the pain, which clearly John Stossel in the end admits.
Yeah. Now, just back briefly, one more thing before we move on to our next topic here. Well, I want to get your take on this, on the actual ABC documentary. I don't know if you remember actually watching it. I don't. I'm assuming that I probably did watch it, but I mean, I was not even a teenager at that point, or I was just becoming a teenager, of this thing with Eddie Mansfield on there and him showing all of the insides of the business, even going as far as showing how to get color, or how to blade, because that was a really kind of big one that I don't think had ever been exposed up until that point.
No, I don't believe that it was anything that was ever exposed to that type of an extent. Sure, it would have been exposed to maybe some of the green guys coming in and stuff like that, to those who were looking to get into the business, definitely. But to an actual reporter, to a journalist, to national television, I think that was the first time that it actually ever happened. Mansfield can try to defend what he has said to his grave.
An interesting take he had.
Yeah, very, very much so. I don't agree with what he did.
No.
Personally, I don't.
Because he, strangely enough, felt that he said that he wasn't doing this to expose the business. He felt like he was doing this for the boys. Which, I mean, he's talking about the wrestlers, to try and get them health care and all that kind of stuff. And I'm still kind of scratching my head over that approach. I know he believes in his own mind, but I thought that was a little bit odd with that. It very much kind of reminded me of, I forget what the show was called, but you had hinted at earlier dealing with the magic stuff, when there was that TV show done with that the masked magician, I think they called him, where he exposed a lot of the real classic magic illusions out there, and received a lot of flack. And I know he ended up exposing, I forget who he was, but it really kind of turned that industry up on its upside down as well. So it very much reminded me, and had that same kind of feel, maybe just not quite to the extent.
Definitely, I agree with that, and I do believe that the show was actually called Exposed.
I think you're correct on that.
Yeah, Exposed: The Secrets of Magic.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, this was like I said, an interesting episode. I did learn a couple new things here, and it refreshed my memory on a lot of the stuff I like I said, not necessarily forgotten about, just kind of sort of lost track of. So it was good to get in this one. And like I said, this is one of my favorites. And I've always said too, I'm very much an old school wrestling fan, and still a fan of those original days and the kayfabe. I know that those days are kind of long gone, but we're going to deal with that a little bit later in this episode as well. Next thing that I want to hit on here, Karl, is we're going more modern day with this, and we're dealing with another release. And this one is strange because it's unexpected but expected at the same time. And I actually had a lot of confidence and I saw a lot of potential in this guy. We're talking about Cain Velasquez, who went by his own name. He didn't come up with they didn't give him any kind of gimmick professional wrestler name or anything like that. But it seems as though he's been released from the company before really getting any kind of momentum. I believe just the one match that he had. And like I said, this was a guy that was legitimately trained, even did some actual wrestling down in Mexico, and seems to be done. But I have a feeling that he's not permanently done in professional wrestling. I think that this guy actually has a future. It's just a matter of where he'll end up.
That's exactly it. It's going to be a matter of where he ends up. Unfortunately, with all of this stuff that's happening, a name that wasn't included before that has been included now, even has been Curtis Axel. The son of Mr. Perfect. He has been released as well. And then shortly after that, we got news that Cain Velasquez has been released as well. And I believe that he had 2 matches. And unfortunately, his career in the WWE has been cut short due to this crazy stuff that's happening in the world, not just professional wrestling, but in the entire world right now. It'll be interesting to see where he goes. I don't even want to give a speculation as to where I want to see him go, because at this point, he can go anywhere, and I think that he will strive and do good.
Well, I will give a little speculation just to put a couple of feelers out there. I will say either AAA or CMLL. That would just fit, given his history, his background, or New Japan Pro Wrestling. I think he would fit in there. There's a lot of people like to do MMA wrestling crossover there as well. So I think both places would be appropriate for him. Next up, some more WWE stuff, and I think this will lead to a larger topic because there's definitely more surrounding this regarding social media, whatnot. Vince, I've seen this in quite a few places now. When I try and talk about these things on these episodes, I try, make sure that they're popping up in a number of places so that there's some legitimacy to it. But it seems as though Vince McMahon backstage essentially now, Karl, has the attitude of, well, I just really don't really care anymore. I almost had to kind of censor myself there. He basically just doesn't really care anymore. And I think that you can definitely see that attitude reflected in the product. Now, just to make a direct comparison to another company, we're talking AEW. Now, their company and the way they're doing things isn't flawless. They have their issues just like every other company does. I mean, nobody's perfect. But their shows and their storylines tend to kind of flow, and a lot of them kind of tie in together. They intermingle. With the WWE product, with the majority of their shows, especially with Raw and SmackDown, everything feels chopped up and really separate. Like, it's okay, here's this story, and there's nothing tying it all together. It's just, it feels really kind of choppy. And I think that this is largely due to the fact that the person who has the final say just really doesn't care anymore. And I really do get that impression.
I do as well. It almost feels as though they have a plethora of writers that are just specific to a storyline. So it seems like, okay, this thing happening here, there's one person to write that. And then this happening here, there's one person to write that. And this happening here, there's only one person to write that. But I don't want you guys talking to each other. You just bring everything to me at the end, right? So they really have no way or no chance to intermingle and meld things together to make it a smooth type of content that's being put out there. I think what might be something happening as well is that there might be a little bit of maybe Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that onsetting. I read a couple of places here that Vince could be heard in his office, whether it was on a conference call or something. I can't remember exactly what it was now, but where his mind kind of went back to Draws days, where Draws could essentially make himself vomit on command.
Yep.
And Vince started coughing and said, "Oh, I'm gonna be sick. I'm gonna be sick," and then was dry heaving, and then was kind of like, no, hold on, I can do this, and then it was just weird. Very, very weird to hear that this was even something that was happening and going on. So yeah, I think that there could be a little bit of an onset of a mental situation happening here, and because of that, and all the other stresses that Vince McMahon has right now between the XFL and between shareholders and stakeholders in the company and everything that's going on. I think there's serious issues right now with Vince McMahon, unfortunately.
Now, you had mentioned about people kind of writing individual things, and I kind of led you into that. I think what a really good comparison of something outside of professional wrestling to give people some idea here. Let's say if we were to take any kind of band out there, let's say Metallica. Let's just throw Metallica. It would be like if each individual person in the band recorded and did their part of a song all kind of by itself. Like whether, the guitarist just recorded by himself, and then the bass guitarist and the singer and the drummer, if they all kind of recorded something separately and then just jammed it all together and expected it to sound good.
And that's when you get Saint Anger.
Oh, man. I can argue with it. That's you might get me on a bit of a tangent. I actually enjoyed that album. I think the drums were recorded a little too loudly. That was my really only issue with that album. But I digress on that. But I think hopefully that kind of made some sense there. But it's like getting a band to try and record together if they're all separate and then just jammed everything together and expected it to sound like something. It's not going to. You need to. Yeah. Everybody has to work together for it to actually make a song. With sound, with music, you can't just throw stuff up against the wall and expect it to sound good. It has to actually make sense. So now, having said this too, there are people who aren't not defending this whole approach. There are still people, especially on social media, that are still defending this, still saying that this is kind of great, and also saying that this is the one that really makes me scratch my head. I want to get your opinion on that. The reason for the product being bad, or for it being shit, I'll just throw it there, for it being shit, is it's the fans' fault. It's the fans' fault that the product is bad. Do you think that there's anything to that? Because I can't wrap my head around the idea. What, it's the fans' fault that the product sucks? That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever.
I think the only way that could make sense is if the fans were doing the writing and really telling the stories.
Yep.
The fans are there to enjoy the show. Now, maybe, I mean, if the fans aren't getting behind a storyline or something like that, then yeah, maybe it's the fans' fault for not getting behind it. But
Might be
it's not the fans' job to get behind it. It's your job to get the fans behind it.
Bingo, you nailed it.
That's the difference.
Right?
Right.
People are not only voicing their opinion with their voice or with their keyboards in this case when it comes to social media, but they're also voting and voicing their opinions with their wallets now, because people aren't investing their time in the weekly WWE program because the company isn't investing time in them. That's the perception that they're getting from all this. And then so fans like myself are moving away from WWE. When things get back up and running, I'm going to be subscribing to New Japan World on a monthly basis, because they're putting on the kind of product that I want to see. Because being a lifelong fan for the better part of 30 years, I've been a fan just as long as I've known Karl, maybe even a little bit longer, that I do hold wrestling to a bit of a higher standard, and I expect my wrestling to be good. And that shouldn't sound like an entitled kind of opinion. It's something that we've been a lifelong part of and been a fan of, and we want and expect it to be good, and rightfully so, because it should be good, and it can be good if you actually care.
I think it comes back to wording with everything. So you have New Japan Pro Wrestling. You have All Elite Wrestling. You have Impact Wrestling. And then to top everything off, at the top of the food chain, unfortunately, you have World Wrestling Entertainment. Yep. And that's where the difference comes in. The WWE is trying to give you an entertaining type of story for everything. And unfortunately, right now, things aren't being entertaining.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's where the biggest thing comes in, is that all these other companies are actually kind of maybe staying true to old style and old school wrestling. And that's why we are enjoying it so much more.
Bingo. And, the empty arena shows, I'll get to this a little bit later too. That was a good temporary solution to kind of get us through this times, but it's getting to the point. I don't know how you feel on this, Karl, but I'm done with these empty arena shows, especially done by these larger companies. I understand for the smaller promotions like our friends with CWE. I don't know whether Kim with Ignite Wrestling will do empty arena shows. I'm assuming not, because they're a promotion that really feeds off the fans, and so does CWE. I mean, these companies need to stay afloat because they're not these big companies like WWE and whatnot. But these empty arena shows done by these major promotions, specifically WWE and AEW, I'm over them, and I would honestly prefer them to just stop and just do some documentaries and stuff in the meantime, because I think that it's really taking away from the product, and it's a detriment to it, because the fans there in person are a big part of the experience, not only for us watching at home, but for the talent putting on the shows. They feed off that energy from the crowd, and without that there, it feels completely wrong. The dynamics just aren't there anymore. So I would prefer that they just stop and do something else in the meantime, do some documentaries, what have you. The company like WWE can do that. Clearly, they do that stuff all the time. Just focus on that for the time being, and we can look back on the older content. and just kind of go from there. That's what New Japan and Ring of Honor, they're just holding off, because especially in the Japanese wrestling environment, we talked about that before. We've talked to wrestlers that have wrestled over in Japan, our friend Jazzy, for example, that full fan experience is completely different over there, and it's very integral to the actual product itself, and that's a big reason why that they're holding off, and they also don't want to put their fans and their talent in danger, given what we're dealing with right now. So
I think for All Elite Wrestling, it's okay. I'm okay with it because they have a few of the talent that's actually out there. Yeah. So it's giving it just a little bit of a dynamic to it. I'm fine with that, and I'm okay with it too, because I've worked shows where there have been like 10 people in the crowd, and I still have to give it the exact same that I would if I'm in a crowd with 10,000 people. That's just what you do in the professional wrestling business. With the WWE, they're established. They've been around long enough that people know who the WWE is. So for them to maybe take a step back, they can kind of do a reset. Any storylines that were happening, if they had done this at the very beginning, instead of doing empty arena shows or empty shows, whatever, they could have just stopped everything. And then by the time they came back around 2, 3, 4 months later, most people would have kind of forgotten about these other storylines that have happened. Yeah. And then they can build on new storylines and get new things going. So in that respect, it would have been a good idea for the WWE to have done that and just do retrospective shows like Ring of Honor has been doing, like I said to do in the very beginning of this whole thing. But Bingo. AEW, I don't think could have done that. They don't have enough content. They don't have enough rights to different content for them to be able to have done that. So the approach that they've taken, I think, is best for AEW right now.
Yeah, I can agree to a certain extent there. And with the WWE stuff, the expression that comes to mind is absence makes the heart grow fonder. And I think that really would have been the case there, especially with a lot of the really crappy storylines going on there, to just abandon those and just start back fresh. But obviously that's not going to be the case. So we're just going to kind of watch it all kind of unfold. Having said that, we had been talking about Vince, and this kind of leads into this next part of this topic. Now, when I'm talking about who's going to take over for Vince when he leaves, I am not referring to Vince McMahon as the character in WWE, not Vince McMahon, the guy in charge of WWE. I'm talking about being the CEO, being the owner of the company. Who should take over in that role once Vince either decides to leave, retires, or dies, whichever happens? Who do you see filling that seat there, Karl?
Triple H.
Yeah.
I do. I mean, with everything that he's been doing and everything that he's done with NXT UK, all of that, and it's still technically inside the family then. So it's still a family business for the WWE. Now, whether they, on paper, it's in Stephanie's name, and then Triple H is running things, or if Vince just decides, you know what, I'm gonna, like, all of my children are gonna have a piece of it, but then just Triple H is kind of running things in that Vince McMahon type of role. I think any roundabout way that it really happens, it's going to be Triple H that's running things.
Interesting take, and definite possibility. For myself, during the course of our week preparing for this podcast here, Karl, not only am I combing websites and watching wrestling content to get ideas to do for Turnbuckle Talk here, I also deal and talk with a lot of our friends that we work with. Michael Jargo, Rick Vickery, who I do the not the Wrestle Podcast, the Hot Tag WrestleCast. There's so many things that we're kind of involved in and tied in. Our friends over at the Hameen Media Network as well, and specifically though Jargo. Talking to him about this week and who could take over in this role of being the CEO / owner of the company, and he had a very interesting take that I will latch onto and do as my pick as well, because I think it's a legitimate possibility. And this may blow your mind here, Karl, but I think you may also like it as well, because I know you're particularly fond of this company and the content that they put out. My pick to take over for Vince McMahon as the CEO/owner of WWE. I'm slow rolling Karl. I'm going to tell him before he gets pissed off. I am talking about Mr. Robert Iger. Bob Iger, the owner of Disney, is going to take over the role of Vince McMahon, or the role that will be vacated by Vince McMahon as the owner/CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment. There you go.
I definitely could see that. I knew exactly where you were going with it. So I wasn't getting ticked off at all. But yeah, like that's legitimately something that I can see. What does Disney own? Disney owns everything except the WWE right now. But Disney owns everything. Like, I mean, they have purchased up so many different things and just really have their hand in so much that I could definitely see that. Why not?
Yep.
Yeah.
Like I said, it'll either be, I haven't really narrowed down to two possibilities if WWE is going to sell the entire company, which we've also talked about this on the WrestleCast this week with Rick, and we did have Jargo on for this as well. So when you listen to the episode, you'll be able to hear our take on that. It's not the whole company that's up for sale with this. And we've actually looked into this through multiple sources. It's the rights to the pay-per-views and that content that is up for sale, not the entire company. But is it still something that could happen? Yeah, is it still something that could happen? Potentially. But as of right now, it's not the entire company that's up for sale. People need to get over themselves. This is something, again, that's all over social media, and people think that they know everything of what's going on with this, and it just is not the case. The entire company is not for sale. I can't stress that enough, people. It's not the case.
And for right now, with just even the pay-per-view rights, it's something that definitely we could see Disney kind of latching onto, as well. Different sports networks, like we could have TSN, or we could have ESPN, possibly Fox. Who is Fox owned by? Oh, Fox is owned by Disney, right? So in a roundabout way, Disney yet again, right? So I mean, yeah, like just for right now, the pay-per-view rights, definitely I could see it going to a company outside of the Vince McMahon family lineage. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I think I would be okay with that. I would be fine with that. At the end of the day, when Vince McMahon is done with owning the company, whether that is on his own volition or whether that is death taking him, either way, I think that the family name of McMahon is still going to hold an ownership in the company. But for the pay-per-view rights, at least, that we're talking about now, that are kind of in talks and in stages of possibly being put out there to someone else, yeah, I could see it being Disney. What other names, Big Joe, have you seen or heard or even can think of yourself besides like ESPN, Fox, Disney, anything like that? What other names do you think could possibly be in a running for pay-per-view rights?
Again, the wording of that is very crucial, the pay-per-view rights. So again, we're not talking the whole company. Fox isn't going to buy the WWE. That's a big one that I've seen out there. That is not going to happen. A television network like Fox is not going to buy this product, especially given their dealings with SmackDown, and they were not impressed. So they sure as hell aren't going to buy the entire company. Now, when it comes to the pay-per-view rights, again, I think that's the important part here. I'm thinking either Disney, which they could then tie that into the Disney Plus subscription. You could put the shows onto Disney Plus. You can maybe up that price or do like a premium of where you can get Disney Plus included with the WWE stuff and pay maybe like an extra $2, $3, $4, or $5, whatever it will be. Or, as I've said before, you tie it into the Amazon Prime subscription, because then you could because they already do Prime Video, you could tie that into that and up the price of that a little bit. And then also you have another distribution for merchandise through Amazon, right? Because Amazon is a big place where people buy a lot of products from now, especially nowadays. We can't go shopping everywhere that we want. Amazon is a big deal. And I think that it's going to be one of those two. I think it's either going to be Amazon or it's going to be Disney that gets into this deal.
I agree.
Yep.
Either or.
Yep. Because you have to think, like I said, with the merchandise, it's be such a powerful thing through Amazon, especially if you were to tie it into the Prime membership. You'd have to up the price of it a little bit, but I think that there'd be enough people that would be interested in that, because Amazon's friggin' huge. Like they're probably one of the biggest companies going around right now.
Yeah, definitely they are.
Yeah. And then you have the Disney spectrum. I mean, they even own freaking Star Wars and all the rights to it. The park down in Florida and all that, that's all Disney. And so that'd be another really powerful thing too. And they have the brand recognition of Disney as well, right? Which, I mean, everybody knows Disney. So
Yes.
all right. So before we take our break here and do our Showstopper segment, we're going to do our Match of the Week segment, which we were talking before we were recording here, and I believe that only once we've picked the same pick, which I believe was 2 weeks ago now, where we picked the same pick here. So we're going to see if it's going to happen again here. I think I went first last week, so I'm going to let you make your pick this week here, Karl, and I will sit by with bated breath to see if I picked the same thing as you or not.
My pick this week is in my mind, at least an A+ match coming out of All Elite Wrestling. We're looking a semi-final tournament match for the TNT Championship. Cody versus Darby Allin.
There you go. Excellent pick. I thought that was a good match. Would have benefited to there being a crowd, but it was still pulled off very well, and I definitely enjoyed that. We do not have the same pick this week here, Karl, which is good. I'm rewinding the clock for mine here. I was originally going to plan for something else, but then I realized I had picked it before, so I had to axe that pick. But this one is coming from a entirely different company as you. We are talking about from Ring of Honor, and we are going all the way back to the War of the Worlds tour in 2014 for a matchup between Shinsuke Nakamura versus Kevin Steen. Wow. These are two guys who are in WWE now, and this is an example of what you can really do with these guys if you were to just let them be themselves.
Yeah, definitely it is. That's something that we have talked about many times before, is how the WWE seems to water down all of these talent that they pick up from other promotions. Amazing stuff coming from both of those guys in other promotions. And now to really throw them in there into the WWE watered down really doesn't have the same effect, especially for us professional wrestling fans who have seen what they can do. Now we just kind of sit there and yawn, and we're bored because we know what they can actually do.
Especially, dealing with the one in this match, we talked about it before with Shinsuke Nakamura and AJ Styles, and they had their match in WWE, and I mean that could have been so much more too, because they had fantastic matches together. Actually, in real time too, I'm going to send Karl a link to my pick for match of the week as well, so that he can enjoy this. And we might even share this out on our social media page so other people can check this out, because this was a fantastic match that if you're a fan of either of these guys, you need to check this out. This was really, really well done.
We definitely will then. We will put it out to our social media on Facebook. So make sure that you go to facebook.com and search out TB Talk Pod. Mm-hmm. You will definitely find us that way. fb.me/TB Talk Pod will take you right to that. Go ahead and go there and make sure that you give that page a like, and make sure that you follow us on our Facebook page.
Absolutely. Now, just some brief breaking news before we go to our Showstopper segment. I don't know if you have seen this pop up at all, but I thought it was very interesting, and I'm just looking it up briefly just to get the right date on this for when this is happening. Yeah. So the upcoming Money in the Bank pay-per-view, which again, it's tough to me to call them pay-per-views because they really aren't at this point, is going to take place on Sunday, May 10th at the WWE Global Headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut. And we had mentioned before in a previous episode that the briefcase will be on the roof of the building with a ring up there as well. Now, something else has happened with this match here, Karl, because from what I have seen in multiple places, again, I try and look for this in multiple places to make sure this is the case, that the men's and women's Money in the Bank ladder match will be happening at the exact same time.
I have been seeing the exact same reports coming out. Simultaneously, we are going to have the men's and women's Money in the Bank ladder match.
I don't know about that, man.
Climbing the corporate ladder.
Literally. I don't know how that's going to work. Logistically, it has cluster, you know what, written all over it.
Yes.
I mean, it's an interesting, unique concept, but just, I don't know how you pull it off. Like, just personnel-wise, like even just talent-wise, filming it wise, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words. I don't know. I hope it's going to be good, but I don't know how it can be. There's just going to be too many bodies in the way.
There definitely is. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to kind of see. I have seen reports as well that Vince McMahon really wants to go very cinematic with this. Yep. And that even so far as to simulate falling off of a building. Spoiler, maybe. We'll have to see. Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, he wants to go very cinematic with it. So it'll be interesting to see how they kind of play both of, the genders, the males and the females, in pretty much together, trying to win this match and make it cinematic at the same time. Yeah, this is just getting really confusing.
Yeah. The only other couple things I think are anywhere near notable to bring up here. A couple of quick WWE things here. It looks like a certain person working at commentary wants to make an in-ring return. And we're talking about Mr. Corey Graves. That I'm not sure about. I think he's been away a little too long to kind of get back in there. Then again, he's really not that great in the commentary role either. I thought he made a good first impression when he first started doing it. I was pretty high on him, but then it got to all the petty kind of squabbling stuff and that kind of started to annoy me with him. But as for an in-ring return, I don't know about that. I don't want to shatter anybody's dreams and aspirations, but I don't know. That's a tough one for me.
Yeah, for me as well. I mean, have we seen comeback stories? Definitely we have. We just recently saw Edge with a comeback story, looking in even better shape than he did when he was working with the WWE. So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, there could be a comeback story, but after everything that he's been doing on commentary, how do you really fit that in? That's the biggest thing.
So tying in with that as well with Corey Graves, he does a quote-unquote podcast for the WWE called After the Bell. It's really just a very WWE-centric shill type of podcast program. That's really all it is. If you listen to it, it's nothing really spectacular in my opinion. Then again, I'm pretty biased with our content. But Jeff Hardy was on there recently and said who he wants to have his last match in WWE, his retirement match. And he wants to have his match with Randy Orton. I would have said Matt Hardy, but obviously that's not going to be able to be done now because Matt's over in AEW. But if Jeff were to have an actual pro wrestling retirement match, I would want it to be against his own brother.
Yeah, me too. Definitely, I would.
I mean, Randy is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from Randy Orton. I think he's probably one of the most talented professional wrestlers out there still, even just when it comes to the ability in the ring. Forget character work and all that. I always thought he was one of the best professional wrestlers out there because he really honed his craft and came up through and really earned his spot there. But as for a last match with Jeff Hardy, I don't know. I think that you could do so much more with Jeff and Matt. And just that there's so much there you can work off in experience-wise and storyline-wise. But it's one of the things we'll have to wait and see. I think it's probably still a good few years off, if not more. So things could change.
Definitely. All right. So we just want to leave off on a good note for some breaking news story. It is coming out of Odessa, Florida. Say whatever you want about this man here. This guy is a heart of gold. Okay. So there's a 7-year-old battling a life-threatening illness in Odessa, Florida. And let's call him Mr. Make-A-Wish. Mr. Make-A-Wish, John Cena, put on gloves, put on a mask, and went and made this kid's day by visiting him at his home. an amazing story. No matter what you think of John Cena for anything that he's done within the WWE, you can't say that this isn't, a great thing that this guy has done. I mean, granting well over 600 wishes in his span of time with Make-A-Wish, and even in a pandemic, him not being afraid to go out and still make someone else's day, I think is a fantastic story.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that one. All right, man, we're going to take a brief break here. We're going to come back with our Showstopper segment, and we have an interesting one, and it's going to tie into a bit with our first topic of the episode here, so we'll be right back. This week's episode is brought to you by Collar and Elbow. Visit collarandelbowbrand.com where you can get 15% off when using promo code JKPodcast at the checkout, including this week's featured item, the Good Brothers Dojo t-shirt. All right, guys, Big Joe and Karl Karufel back here on Turnbuckle Talk.
Yes, we are, everyone, and welcome to the greatest segment in the history of podcasting. We are talking about our Showstopper segment.
Yeah, Karl, so we had mentioned earlier in the episode, we were talking about the episode Dark Side of the Ring with the whole Dr. D segment, and we did touch on some Jim Cornette stuff as well, talking about the history and the kayfabe in the professional wrestling business. And that's the question and the topic for this week. Can professional wrestling ever return to the days of kayfabe? That's a question I've been asked by some other people, casual fans and some fans of our podcast and professional wrestling fans in general, is if we could ever get back to those days. It would be extremely difficult to get back to those days just because everything's already been exposed. It's already all kind of out there. And to get people to forget all that would be, I think, next to impossible. It would really take basically everything to kind of go away for a good portion of time and then to have it come back again, which, I mean, I guess could have technically been possible during this whole pandemic situation. But, there are businesses and other vested interests at hand here that a lot of these places, like WWE, they can't just stop. They still have to put out something. So it would be extremely difficult for people to forget the ins and outs of the behind-the-scenes aspect of professional wrestling.
Short answer for myself, no.
Yeah.
There is not a time where we will be able to get back to 100% kayfabe. It's just not going to happen. The age that we live in today, with the internet and with everything that's out there and available for us, it's not going to happen. Generations know now, right? So unless professional wrestling stops for the next 5 generations of people and then can restart again that way with kayfabe, other than that, no, I really don't think that it will.
Having said that, then, in the meantime, with the modern day situation here, is there a way that we can not reset things, but to kind of protect things a little bit more? Because I know that one angle or one approach that's been kind of thrown out there, and again, I'm going to mention our friend Mr. Michael Jargo, is that when it comes to the stuff, you roll credits at the end of the program. You say, okay, here's Colby Lopez as Seth Rollins, here's so-and-so as this person. And then that way we can make the distinction. It's okay, so we make that distinction. Okay, this is this person as this character, and then kind of make that separation there for people, so that especially when there's these interactions on social media, that this is Colby Lopez making this comment or making this observation, not the Seth Rollins character doing this.
You could, but then it's not professional wrestling anymore.
No,
then it's
exactly
a television show, and it's right. I think that personally that would take away completely from what professional wrestling actually is. Then it's just an entertainment. It's a movie. It's a 3-hour movie when a pay-per-view comes on, or it's a an hour-long TV show that's happening, and that's all it would feel like to me.
But for WWE, that's the approach and what they're going towards anyways, right? So this again brings up the fact, or the observation that we made. We have WWE as the sports entertainment entity, and then we have New Japan Pro Wrestling, we have Ring of Honor Wrestling, we have Impact Wrestling, we have Major League Wrestling. We have professional wrestling over here and WWE over here. I think what we have to do is we have to make that clear split now. That WWE is its own separate thing, and then there's everybody else over here on this side. Because people are still trying to tell me that WWE is professional wrestling, and I have to say a hard no on that. WWE is no longer professional wrestling. It is sports entertainment, especially when you put it up against a company like specifically New Japan Pro Wrestling. They are not in the same league anymore. It's nowhere near the same.
Yeah, I agree. It is nowhere near the same.
And going just with local promotions and your local feds as well. Those are companies that put on professional wrestling. You can go check these out too for people who are still latching on and trying to defend and trying to really sell this WWE stuff to me. You're not just restricted to that. And this is something that we've harped on all the time, that there's all this other great professional wrestling. If you really feel that WWE isn't giving you your pro wrestling content, which they arguably are not, there's lots of other avenues and roads to take. And it's not just to do with the internet or television. There's a lot of this stuff happening, maybe not right now, given the situation, but once we get back to quote unquote normalcy, there is lots of great professional wrestling to watch in person, folks.
There definitely is, whether it's in person or whether it is online, like YouTube, Twitch, anything like that. Great content coming from, we've mentioned before, companies like Canadian Wrestling's Elite, Impact Wrestling, let's go Ignite Wrestling, let's go MLW, like all these different companies that are out there that are putting content out for us in an actual professional wrestling standpoint. Ring of Honor, they put stuff out there onto YouTube as well. All Elite Wrestling with Dark, right? NWA. This is all great content that's there, that's available for you. So it's just a matter of picking and choosing what you prefer to watch. And if you're continuing to just sit there and be in disgust from what you're watching, then that's your own fault, because you've got options available.
And people have asked me when it comes to WWE, it's like, well, can they get back to just being professional wrestling and no more of all this side kind of stuff? At this point, again, my response has to be no, because they're tied into so many of these other things. They make movies. Their matches are kind of turning into movies. They do all this social media stuff and all of this other stuff with television networks and all that. They're kind of stuck in the position that they're at. They can't current day get back to that state. They can't. There's too many, like I said, too many other vested interests. There's too many companies that are in this money wise now that they can't just revert back to just being professional wrestling and just shut everything out. That they're just not in a position to, unfortunately. I would like to see it, but realistically, it's just not in the cards for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I would have to agree.
So it is what it is. Okay, man. Well, I guess that about wraps up for this week, unless you got anything else that you want to talk about that's happened this week in the world of professional wrestling.
Taking a look, scrolling through, there really isn't much more that I'm seeing. Yeah, unfortunately not. We'll just have to kind of watch the news sites and hope we get some more stuff to bring you guys next week on Turnbuckle Talk.
Yep, absolutely. And I guess the only other plug that I'll kind of mention is my other podcast. I'm, of course, one of the main hosts and the producer of the Hot Tag WrestleCast with our friend, Mr. Richard Bronson Vickery. You wanted to make sure I refer to him as Richard Bronson Vickery, because his middle name is Bronson, for all of you who wondered, by the way. And we had some really cool stuff this week here. We celebrated Taco Tuesday because the episode of the WrestleCast is coming out on Tuesday alongside Turnbuckle Talk for the first foreseeable future as well. So we celebrated Taco Tuesday because, as you all are aware, I'm a big fan of tacos. I know Karl likes tacos as well. Rick's like tacos, and tacos seem to be a pretty popular food around here. We did talk to Jargo about the future of New Japan Pro Wrestling kind of going forward, which is very, very interesting. He's actually be starting up his own podcast called Destino very soon, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing his take on all of that stuff as well. And we also talked about, we have a regular segment on on the WrestleCast now called Hitting the Mark Tards, which is a term that we've used on this podcast, and it also kind of ties into the Hitting the Marks Pro Wrestling podcast that both Rick and Jargo were part of, so we kind of tie that into a segment, and we had some interesting stuff there as well. And it was a really good record this weekend. And we were also blessed by the presence of an interview with Mr. Jackson Breeze. For those of you who are not familiar with who he is the former co-owner and promoter of HWA. And they were pretty much a training ground for a lot of the wrestlers involved in the Attitude Era. I mean, that man has had the pleasure to work with a lot of really important talent that was around at that time, and also involved currently with Future Great Wrestling as well. So you'll get to hear that interview this week. It was fantastic, and some very interesting and some very cool incidents from that man as well. So, and before we forget to maybe make a brief mention for Collar and Elbow, Karl, before we go.
That's right, collarandelbowbrand.com. They have some amazing new merchandise drops lately that they've been putting out. They slacked for a little bit, but given everything that's been going on, we understand. Mr. Al Snow has been very busy with OVW and helping to get OVW rejuvenated and back out there. Check out OVW actually on YouTube. They have a weekly show as well. Go to collarandelbowbrand.com. It is available at all of our social media, a clickable link for you to click on. So much cool stuff over there. So many new t-shirts that they've put out there. And if you use our promo code JKPodcast, you can get yourself 10% off your entire order. Not only are you saving money, but you are also helping support us at Turnbuckle Talk.
There you go. Absolutely. All right, man. We will end it off for this week, and we'll see you on the next one.
Have a nice day.
It's me. It's an honor to be the beat. As you can tell in the background, we are out celebrating. That is what we do here at hittingthemarks.com. And I invite everyone to continue to tune in to Turnbuckle Talk, but check out all of our other shows we have. You can find that all at hittingthemarks.com.
Run.